Hello, welcome to another video in the Great Math Adventure. This is Mr. Thomas Wick. We're going to look at lesson 1-6, Order of Operations and Evaluating Expressions today. Please go ahead and turn to lucky page number 13 in your Unit 1 packet and you will find the notes that go along with this video. Now today we're going to talk about first the order of operations. A lot of you, when you talk about order of operations, will remember the expression PEMDAS. Some other people will recall the mnemonic device, "Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally." Now those are both good tools to help you with the order of operations, but we're going to look at a different one today, one that you may not have seen, and that's going to be called GEMS, G-E-M-S. This helps get rid of some of the misconceptions that come with PEMDAS and "Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally." So the first one we're going to look at is the G in this. And the G is going to stand for grouping. Now grouping can mean a couple different things. For instance, it could be parentheses. It could be brackets. It could even be a fraction bar, grouping a top section and a bottom section. So grouping is going to include all those different topics, and that's going to be what we always are going to do first. Sometimes you'll find that within those parentheses you have to do your own set of order of operations, and we'll look at some examples of those later on. The E is going to stand for exponents. Those are those little numbers that rise above the other ones. For example, if you had x squared, the 2 there would be the exponent. Once you're done taking care of the grouping, you're going to move on to the exponents. Do any of the problem that has an exponent in it. Now the next step, and where things start to differ a little bit, is we multiply and divide. Now it's important to note that these are on the same step. A lot of people get the misconception in PEMDAS that just because the M comes first, you do all the multiplication and then you start doing all the division. But you're actually supposed to do multiplication and division in the same step. The trick is you need to be moving from left to right. So you would start at the beginning of the expression, and whatever comes first, whether it be multiply or divide, you would do that first. And you continue across, working your way through every multiplication and division problem that would occur within that expression, whichever comes first, left to right. Our last step is going to be subtraction and addition. And again, just like multiplication and division, it's going to be whichever one comes first, moving left to right. You don't have to do all the subtraction and then do the addition. You don't do all the addition and then do the subtraction. You do whichever comes first, moving left to right. Alright, let's take a look at example number 1. If we are following our order of operations, the first thing we're going to have to look at is grouping. Now I do have a set of grouping tools here with my parentheses. Now I do have a fraction bar, but since it only has one term above and one term below, it's not really serving as a grouping symbol, it's serving more as a division symbol. Now if I had multiple terms up there, like if I had 10 plus 5, or if I had down here like 3 times 2, then we'd have multiple terms and then we would look at it as grouping. But since we only have one term on top and one term on bottom, we're just going to treat that as a regular old division sign. So the first thing we want to do is 3 minus 5, and that's going to give us a negative 2. Now it's very important that we bring everything else down exactly how it looks. We don't want to leave any number or symbol behind. So I'm just going to recopy everything down one more time. Now the next thing I'm going to need to do is my exponents. I do have an exponent. I'm squaring something here. I'm taking negative 2 and squaring it. Now, to square something means to multiply it by itself. So this is really negative 2 times negative 2. When we multiply two negatives together, we end up with a positive. Now, if you're using your calculator, be very careful with these. If you type in just negative 2 squared, what the calculator reads that as taking the opposite of 2 squared. They don't see that this negative goes with the 2. If you're going to type this into your calculator, you need to put the -2 in parentheses and then square it. That way it takes the -2 as part of the square and you get the +4 you're supposed to. If you do it this way, you're going to get -4, and that's going to throw your whole problem off. So be careful when you're dealing with negatives raised to a certain power. If it's an even power, it will always be positive, and if it's a odd power, it will always be whatever your original sign was. So now that we're back from that mini lesson, we still have 4 plus 20 divided by 2 minus 3 times 3. Our next step is to multiply and divide, and we're going to do that from left to right. It doesn't matter if it's multiplication, it doesn't matter if it's division, whichever one of those two pop up first is the one we're going to deal with. So I have 4 plus, I do have division here, 20 divided by 2, which is going to give me 10. Now I still bring everything else down. So now I have 4 plus 10, and I can do this multiplication. -3 times 3 is going to give me -9. Now the subtraction and addition I do from left to right. So I do 4 plus 10 is 14, and 14 minus 9 is 5. So I get a final answer of 5. Alright. Algebraic expressions can also be evaluated for given values. So we're going to take some of those expressions we've been dealing with before that had the variables in it, and we're going to give a specific number that we're going to be plugging into those expressions. So to evaluate for a given value, we substitute the given number for the matching variable. So we're going to take whatever that variable is supposed to be, and we're going to plug in that number instead. We're going to substitute it. So let's take a look at a couple examples. Alright, if we want to evaluate the expression 3x squared plus 1, and it tells us to evaluate it when x is equal to 4. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to rewrite my equation, and anywhere that I see that x, I'm going to just put a set of parentheses so I can keep my numbers straight. Now, we're going to substitute in for this x with x equals 4. So we're going to plug a 4 in there. And now we just follow our order of operations. Just in case you forget, we are using GEMS. G stands for grouping. We don't have any grouping in this problem, so we move on to exponents. We do have a squared again, so we're going to do 3, and then we're going to do 4 squared, which is 16, plus 1. Now we're going to move on to the M, which stands for multiply and divide. We only have one multiplication or division, and that's the 3 times 16. And that's going to give us 48. And then we bring down the plus 1. And we come down with our S, subtraction and addition. We only have addition this time, and 48 plus 1 is 49. And that's going to give us our final answer there. We have one more example to do together, and that's example number 3. This time you'll notice they give us 2 variables. We're going to proceed exactly the same way. We're going to put parentheses wherever we see those variables. And I'll even put an extra set in there, just so that we can be clear on what we have. And I'll write the rest of this expression. We don't have an equal sign, so it's an expression. Now where M was, I'm going to plug in 5. And where P was, I'm going to plug in -2. Now it's important that you keep that negative with it, other words it's going to throw off our whole answer. So going back to GEMDAS, we need to do our grouping. Now in this case, we're going to have a giant set of grouping. It's going to be everything in here. So we need to do everything in here before we do anything on the outside. So we're actually going to start GEMDAS over on the inside of here. Now, we don't have any grouping within the grouping, so that's good. Sometimes you will have grouping within grouping. So we can go ahead and focus on exponents. I'm still going to write everything down exactly the way it comes. Now notice on this time we don't have parentheses around that negative and the 7. It's just going to be 7 squared instead of -7 squared. So we're actually going to leave this minus sign the way it is, because we don't have anything that includes it with that 7. So 7 squared is going to give us 49, and then we copy everything else down just as we're given. Our next step is multiplication and division. Now, this 5 is technically multiplying everything, but we're not done with our grouping, so we still have to leave him out for now. So I'm just going to write him there. We still have the negative 2 minus 49. Now we have a negative 10 divided by 2. That's going to give us negative 5. And we're finished with that step. We can now move on to subtraction and addition within the grouping. That 5 still has to stay out there because we're still not done with our initial grouping. But we're going to have negative 2 minus 49 minus 5. And that's going to give us negative 56. Alright, now we're finally done with all that grouping, so now we can finally include the Mr. 5 that's been patiently waiting for us out here. And we can multiply because we don't have any exponents outside of this grouping. And it's our first multiplication or division moving left to right. We're going to multiply 5 times a negative 56. And that's going to give us a negative 280. And that's going to be our final answer. Go ahead and continue to work on the practice for lesson 1-6. That practice can be found on page 13 and will carry over to 14. And then go ahead and pick up your application from the Algebra Embassy. Good luck, see you next video.